Good morning, ladies. Hi. Good morning. Good morning. Hi. We're going to get started. How are you guys? Great to see the energy and the enthusiasm and all the smiling faces. Hope that you guys had a great morning today. We're going to talk about a topic that I believe is crucial for all Christian working women. How to be boldly ambitious in a way that is spirit-led. When we talk about ambition in the world, it often leads to high-pressure situations where we feel like we need to get ahead at all costs. Sometimes it means that we have to give up some of our peace of mind. It causes stress. Sometimes it causes rivalry, competition, a lack of collaboration. But today what we're going to do is we're going to reframe ambition in a way that we can now pursue ambition in a way that we're at peace, and we can do it in a godly manner that we know that we're actually blessing others and not just doing things for personal self-gain. So my name is Ellie Nieves. I am, of course, a Christ follower. I am a wife, a bonus mom of 3. I'm an attorney by day that works in legislative and regulatory affairs at a Fortune 300 company. I primarily work on artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, and privacy issues these days. And I also have my own company. It's called Leadership Strategies for Women. I launched the company in 2009 because I developed a passion for helping women to get ahead in the workforce. So my goal is to really help women to show up, speak up, and step up in their careers. And just a few years ago, sorry, my timeline is off. But a few years ago, I found that Christian women in particular, as I was, delivering presentations in corporations and associations, I guess, Christian women, we kind of attract each other, right? So I would always have Christian women come up to me afterward and ask me, I hear everything you're saying about how we should be getting ahead in the workplace, but I'm a Christian woman. I don't want to ask for a raise because that sounds greedy to me. I can't self-promote because I want to be humble. I want to honor God. I want to please God. So I started looking for biblical guidance. And by the way, I had struggled with all these things myself after I became a Christian and started working in corporate America. And the more that I dug into the Bible, the more I discovered a pathway for us to be able to succeed in a different way, not just the worldly way. So hopefully I will be sharing some of that with you today. Outside of the work, I also enjoy running. So every year I run 2 or 3 races at Disney. I live in Florida. And I'm a road warrior. I basically live out of my suitcase because I have to work a lot. I have to travel a lot for work, but I also like to earn miles and travel for free with my family. So, ambition. This is a definition that I found online. It's the desire and determination to achieve success. This is a pretty straightforward definition. It's what we all know and how we understand ambition. It's just, we set up a goal and we want to achieve it and we go after it. And if it's something that we're really passionate about, we put our heart and our soul into it and we're determined to go after it. And I want you to remember that ambition in and of itself is not a bad thing. God created us to aspire, to achieve, and to thrive. He puts dreams, goals, and desires in our hearts, and He also provides us with the tools, the abilities, the skills, and the talent in order to achieve those goals. So if you have a goal, if you feel ambitious, if you have personal drive, it's all good. God gave it to you. That's what you're blessed with. And our God is an aspirational God. Does He not want us to be better people, right? One of our goals is to be more like Jesus every day. That's aspirational. We have to set a goal to be more godly, to have a better character, to have integrity. And then we work towards those goals. And the Bible even tells us that in order to be godly, that we have to run after it as if we were running in a race. And that we're running as if we're running to win that race, right? So God wants us to be ambitious and to aspire to godly things. Now, sometimes in the world, we go from just being ambitious to having these dreams and lofty goals to kind of moving into an area that becomes selfish. So I will share a personal story about me. I am a reformed, I'm formally, selfishly ambitious. We'll call it that, right? We'll call it that. So when I graduated from law school, I wanted to run for office. That was my goal. I grew up around elected officials. My mother used to work for an elected official. It kind of rubbed off on me, and that became my goal. In fact, when I went to law school, it had nothing to do with wanting to be a lawyer, nothing at all. I was like, if I'm going to be a legislator, if I'm going to make laws, I need to go learn about law, I'm going to go to law school. That was my thought. So I went to law school, graduated, and the first thing I did was started working on political campaigns in New York City. Now, I don't know if you guys know anything about New York City politics, but it's very rough and tumble. And when I entered New York City politics, it was very male-dominated. So here I am, a young Latina, trying to get myself involved in New York City politics. And you know what? They gave me an opportunity, and I was volunteering, but they didn't take me seriously. Right? I was young, I was a woman, and here are these men that knew better. And I was trying to find a way to get noticed. But at the same time, I'm observing. Right, I'm observing how the men behave, I'm observing what they're doing, and every so often I kind of adopt a little bit of their practices, and now I'm kind of like pushing and shoving, and now I learned I had to be a little bit more aggressive. I needed to speak up for myself. When I'm sitting at the table, I needed to make sure people knew I was there and I couldn't be ignored. So slowly but surely, I started to get noticed. A lot of the stuff I was doing, I was starting to get results. And then there was competition, because the minute you start to get noticed, what happens? People start targeting you, right? It's like, oh, she's getting attention. She's making a name for herself. Now she's kind of getting in my way. And when you're running for office, what happens? Only one person can win, right? So now you've got one seat and everybody's trying to position themselves for the seat. And I've got to tell you, I got to a place where I was so selfish. I was so looking for my own personal recognition and my own personal gain that I became kind of an ugly person. Meanwhile, I did achieve, I did succeed. I got to the height of where I thought my career was going to be. I ended up running a major citywide campaign, and my name was already being bantered around for a Senate seat. But I've got to tell you, one day I was home and I fell to my knees. I was miserable. It was lonely. I had become an ugly person. This idea that I couldn't trust anybody around me, that I needed to backstab, talk about people, that, it was an unsafe place to be that led to a lot of dissatisfaction. And it's actually what led me to the Lord. It was a man that I met during the campaign trail that introduced me to his girlfriend who introduced me to the Lord. So I felt like I needed to reach that rock bottom place in order to meet God. But I had gotten to a very ugly place. So when we talk about selfish ambition is rooted in self-interest and personal glory. It's driven by a desire for recognition, power, or success. And it leads to envy, rivalry, and division. And I love this particular scripture, James 3:16, out of the NLT translation of the Bible. It says, "For wherever there is jealousy and selfish ambition, there you will find disorder and evil of every kind." But I like this translation even better. It says, whenever people are jealous or selfish, they cause trouble and do all sorts of cruel things. So I want you to take a minute, and I want you guys to kind of get to know each other a little bit, but I'm going to give you 5 minutes, and I want you to think about how this scripture might apply to maybe some situations you might have experienced in the workplace. Think about trouble, cruel things. How might it have manifested itself in your workplace? So interested in hearing what some of you might have shared. Anybody want to volunteer to go first? Any volunteers? Volunteers? Why don't we start with this table? Anybody want to share what you discussed?
Go ahead.
We were just saying that as women, I think regardless of what your role is, a lot of us feel like maybe we don't inherently feel that worthiness that we already have. So we feel like we have to prove ourselves, whether someone puts you up against a wall or if you put yourself there.
Yes.
Just by not feeling that inherent worthiness, by trying to prove that you are. But as she was saying, by being in that position, you already are worthy. You don't have to prove anything. Mm-hmm. But I think we feel that a lot of the time.
Yeah.
Regardless of what we're doing, whether it's in the workplace or in relationships with people or things like that, we just have that inherent nature to try to prove something.
Absolutely. So that feeling of being unworthy means that we have to work extra hard to prove ourselves, and that in itself could lead to things like rivalry.
Yeah.
Thank you. How about back here?
Well, I am a nurse and a nurse executive, and as I've grown in my career and in the healthcare leadership space, it's interesting because nursing has this, a service, very oriented goal, but that kind of shifts as you move into the C-suite of healthcare administration and those sorts of things. And as a believer, I shared with the group, I have had a hard time finding women that I wanted to emulate. And as a result, it has made me doubt my calling. But I know that God has designed me on purpose, for a purpose, and for my industry. And I'm called to lead differently, and that's hard.
Yes.
To lead differently.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I'm repeating what you're saying because I've got the microphone on for the recording. So basically what you're saying is that even though you're in a service industry as a nurse, you still find that as you've climbed up the corporate ladder and now that you're in the C-suite, that you've found it very difficult to find women that you can emulate. And that has led to some internal struggles as you try to get ahead in your own career. And you want to still do it in God's name.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, Kelly?
Can I piggyback on that in that I have, we need to, be your backup choir to what you just said.
Yeah.
But I think that leads to, or adds to, I think it adds to the isolation, right? I think there's a physical isolation that we could feel because maybe we don't have the community, physically around us. But I think that there's a spiritual and an emotional isolation that happens as leaders because it's I don't feel like I'm not like these other people around me at work.
Right.
And so I feel like a square peg in a round hole. And so it kind of, I have withdrawn because of that at times, because it's I don't want to be like this. I don't want to be like you. And you don't seem to want to be like me either. And so it's it's navigating that space of really feeling spiritually, emotionally, mentally isolated, not just physically.
So that, I'll call it a toxic kind of work culture, can lead to isolation because we can't relate to what we're seeing in terms of people getting ahead in their careers. So anybody else want to share about how this idea of disorder might manifest itself in your workplace? How about here? Do you guys have anything to share?
We were saying we work together, and it's a sort of a sales environment, and so it is every man and every woman for themselves, and there is no sense of just looking at the word selfishness. It does cause trouble because for us, or what I've experienced, is when you don't feel connected to anybody and you feel like everybody is your competition, it leads to this psychological unsafety feeling where you, again, you isolate and pull back because you don't feel like you have safety with other people.
Right.
And so the three of us really liked what they said upstairs about women are made to complete, not compete.
Yes.
Yes. And so.
Yeah. And do you have something to share?
Speaking to the psychological safety challenges, I think also we now, with isolation spiritual, we take on also, we're not realizing it's trauma. And we're walking in trauma, around trauma, back home, we're with the same trauma, and unless we deal with that, but it's like what we're saying, how do you deal with it? Because you start questioning, what is it me? What am I doing?
Right.
And then it becomes that trust where I'm trusting in the Lord.
Right.
I gotta, it's that safety net.
Right.
Being able to understand clearly that I recognize I'm here unto the Lord.
Right.
My work and results are unto the Lord.
Absolutely.
And hopefully my light is shining enough, bright enough through not just behaviors but leadership decisions. But it was for me when other people start noticing the unlikely behavior of others' selfishness. It's amazing how you feel in community, but then I'm like, okay, so what you gonna do with that?
Right.
And I recognize that it's like, okay, everybody's seeing it, You coming to me, oh, but what are you gonna do about it? So it becomes that question, okay, Lord, it's exposed.
Yeah.
So now what's the next step?
Yeah.
But it is real trauma to be dealt with and talk with somebody through it. And define that that's not your people.
Right.
Because if the leadership is not accountable to doing something about it, that's not the right way.
So to combine what you've said that some environments, you're in a sales environment, and that naturally breeds competition, which again can lead to isolation. And you're bringing up a great point that sometimes some of that behavior is because of trauma. And oftentimes that trauma is exposed, but we often are in workplaces where even though others can see it, especially those in leadership, they don't necessarily speak up about it or address it. But as Christian women in the workplace, we have a big responsibility. God calls us to not only not behave the way everybody else is behaving, but to also influence that environment in the other direction. And that could feel very isolating in itself, because how do you now move up against that big struggle, right? To your point, people will see the bad behavior, but nobody's going to speak up about it. So how do we now put ourselves in a position where we can feel empowered enough to shift the environment for God? So when we look at this next scripture, Philippians 2:3 says, instead of being motivated by selfish ambition or vanity, each of you should in humility be moved to treat one another as more important than yourself. Now this can be challenging when you've got Mary over there talking about you, when you've got Phil interrupting you at every meeting every time you've got an idea, when you've got Kyle stealing your ideas and claiming them as his own, right? Yet God expects us to do something different, right? And I can tell you, on those days when I was selfishly ambitious, I was like, bring it, right? Because you want to dish it, I'm going to dish it back, right? And it became very combative. There was a lot of rivalry. It never led to any good, right? It just led to more fostering that toxic environment. So a lot of the examples that you also mentioned, that's what it does. If it keeps festering, it will lead to a toxic environment. So now it's not just the person's behavior, it's now infecting the culture around you, right? So we need to think about how we can now impact that culture. And taking these words right out of the Bible and start asking ourselves, how do we now use God's words and convert them into action when people are behaving badly, so that we can come up with a different result? So how do you tell the difference between godly ambition and selfish ambition? Feel free to just bring it.
Well, I think if you reflect and see that the goal benefits just you, or I think what motivates you is more individually inclined, then I think that should help guide you in knowing whether this is something that you're doing out of just like selfish ambition, versus godly ambition. Because going back to Philippians 2:3, my version says just like don't look out only for your own interests, but take an interest in others too.
Right.
And so I guess again, if the goal is more self-inclined and
right.
Beneficial to just you,
yeah.
For me.
Yeah, Krista?
Because you kind of alluded to this in the beginning, but when you start to get off, your behaviors get off.
Yes.
And there are spirits attached to selfish ambition, like the spirit of offense. And you find yourself getting agitated about somebody, or offended because they looked or said something to you in a way that you didn't like it. That's when you can kind of check yourself. Because if you start getting into those, and not just there's other things attached to that, but that's, when I start like, I can't believe she responded to me, or even asked me, why did she send me this email? And that's when I realized I have gotten full of myself, what I mean? Like I'm taking this a little too seriously, let me come back to my mission. But you'll start to feel it in your heart, because that's not who we are.
Right.
Right? That's the ugliness.
Yes.
doing things without him.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And even when we're in a situation of service, you mentioned nursing, right? That's a natural space to serve others. When I got into politics, I didn't want to serve myself. My goal was to serve my community. I grew up in the South Bronx in New York City, a poor community, people of color. I wanted to serve my community. So somehow it went from my desire, genuine desire to serve others, to all of a sudden, this is about me. I need the camera on me. Hey, that's what it became, right? So there's a subtle shift if we don't catch it. And to your point, the manifestation of that is our behavior.
Yeah.
Right?
We have to be careful about that in ministry too. Just outright speak in the Christian leadership space and be for a really good cause, because we can say it was for those that were wanting to help and reach with the gospel, but it's all, you have to self-promote in order to be published or to have a platform. So those motivations have to just constantly be in check.
Yes.
Even,
Absolutely. No, absolutely.
It's not just.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Just
Yes.
I would piggyback on that and on this too, and just say, I think one of the big differences is your community. Like the people that you are surrounding yourself with in your free time, I think can really influence the heart when you're at work.
Yes. Yes, and that's what the Bible says, right? Bad company corrupts good character, which I feel helped to get me to where I was. Right here, I was a bunch of, competitive, ugly men, right? And then you feel like I have to do that to compete and succeed as well. So you start adopting the behaviors that you believe will lead to success, will get you to your goal. But God is counterintuitive. That's what I've learned. Yes.
I was just going to add, for me personally, when I'm losing sight and I'm just ambitious for me, right? Godly ambition for me, there's a purpose. And there's a why. And whenever I lose sight of the why and start specializing in what I call the petty, for me, that's a big sign. Like, girl, this is all about you and not about the why.
Yes.
Because God has given each of us an assignment. And it's okay to be ambitious and totally pursue what he's given us to do. But there's a reason why he wants you to do it. So when you lose sight of that why, and you start specializing, you name it. And Crystal, you hit on a lot of those things. But all this little petty stuff, and it gets big, and then you're totally distracted.
Yes.
Because I believe that what you focus on expands, right?
Yes.
So it becomes your everything, and your God-given why is just sitting over your life. But
Absolutely. I love everything that you said. Yes.
I think ultimately, when you have peace, the peace that is of God, it's his decision, your thought.
Yes. So peace is a natural outflow of a godly ambition.
Yes.
That's great. So godly ambition seeks to glorify God in all actions. It's driven by humility and obedience to God. And to your point, it leads to peace, fulfillment, and spiritual growth. So if we're finding ourselves in situations where we're not glorifying God, where we're not approaching our situations in obedience to God or with humility, and we're not feeling a sense of peace, of fulfillment, or spiritual growth, that's an indication that we're off track. And here we are, a nice clean list of godly ambition traits and traits of selfish ambition. So to align our ambition with God's will, we need to be focused. And there are three types of focus. One is spiritually focused, we need to be asset focused, and we need to be outcome focused. So whenever you feel yourself kind of derailing in your godly ambition, remember to get back to these three types of focus. So the first focus, being spiritually focused. So the first thing we want to do is we want to seek wisdom and discernment. And I have a couple of scriptures there, which I think are very helpful, because I love just returning back to the Bible to get God's perspective on the direction that I should be going in. And Proverbs 2:6 says that for the Lord gives wisdom from his mouth, and and from his mouth come knowledge and understanding, right? So we know that if we want to gain wisdom and discernment, that we need to turn first to God. And where do we find his wisdom? In his word, absolutely. We need to go back to his word. And then 1 Corinthians 3:18 says, "Don't fool yourselves. If any of you think you are wise in the things of the world." Because if you think about it, when we enter the workplace, the world has a definition about how we're supposed to get ahead. We're supposed to self-promote. We're supposed to show up a certain way. We're supposed to speak a certain way. We're supposed to do things in a certain way. And our corporate culture, if you come from a corporation or you're not-for-profit or you're whatever organization you come from, it has a tone to it. And you learn what the rhythm of that organization is, and then it tells you that if I want to be successful in this organization, I need to tap into that tone, right? So oftentimes, when we look at what that tone is, it might not be a godly tone. So if you keep those kind of situations in mind, worldly wisdom will tell you that you need to do certain things to get ahead. But godly wisdom tells you otherwise, right? It's counterintuitive. We need to do things differently. So back to 1 Corinthians 3:18, don't fool yourselves. If any of you think that you are wise in the things of the world, you have become foolish. You have to become foolish before you can be truly wise. So one is recognizing what's happening around you, and then grabbing onto God's word and understanding what true wisdom is and true discernment. Because the more we dig into the word, the more discernment we get. And I find that that's become the thing with me over time. You probably get this, right? The more in tune you are with God, you can sense things from people. You could sit in a meeting and somebody could smile at you, but you kind of sense something's off here. I need to watch this person. Yeah. Right? You just there's this knowing. There's an internal knowing of what's going on. You get that discernment from staying in your word, praying to God, staying grounded. God will give you warnings. He will, but we have to be tuned to him. If we get caught up in the culture, and if we're following the things of the world, we get the chaos, the disorder, we become a part of it, right? We take it into ourselves, and then we can't think straight. We're like, oh, what's going on here? What do I have to do next? No, you have to do what God asks you to do. Forget what Joe Schmo is doing over here to Kathy, and no, you need to follow God's path in this particular situation, and you're going to see that things are going to work themselves out. The next thing we need to do to be spiritually focused is to transform our hearts. Ephesians 4:22-24 says, "You were told that your foolish desires will destroy you, and that you must give up your old way of life with all of its bad habits. Let the Spirit change your way of thinking and make you a new person. You were created to be like God, and so you must please him and be truly holy." So it means shaking off those things of the world and those things that we think are supposed to lead to success, and then clinging on to God and trusting that he's going to give us the wisdom and discernment in those moments when we need his direction. I've got to tell you how many times I have made decisions that I knew it just wasn't me. Like, I have done things that I'm like, if in my natural state, I would have never made that choice. I would have never made that decision. But it's when I'm truly grounded in God that I sense him telling me, do this, do that. It's not an audible voice. I don't have God speaking to me from a cloud. It's just like an instinct. Like, you know what? I'm going to do this. This is that natural for me, but I'm going to do this. And then I realized that he was sparing me from something, that he was lining me up for something, whatever that is. But the closer we are to God, the more that we're grounded in him, the more that he starts to transform our lives. He transforms our hearts, and then that starts to lead to manifested action. And then ultimately, we need to cultivate humility. So James 3:13 says, "Are any of you wise or sensible? Then show it by living right and by being humble and wise in everything you do." And that wisdom, that humility, they go hand in hand. Because the wiser we are, the more humility is cultivated, because we understand God's proper place in our lives. And that leads to true humility. Any questions about being spiritually focused? Okay. The next thing that we need to do is we need to be asset focused. Asset focused means that we need to first identify what our assets are, and then we need to embrace our place. So if we think about our assets, what do you think your assets are? Anybody?
Gifts, talents.
Gifts, talents, yep. What else? What else could be an asset for you?
Your past experience with the Lord.
Absolutely, past experience with the Lord, that's huge. Absolutely. What's another asset?
Your character.
Your character, yes. Anyone else? Your relationships, people that God has put in your lives, right, to help you through, provide you with wisdom, maybe guide you in a situation. Friendship, some place to turn to when you need a friend. A church family, a place to go to praise the Lord. You know, think about those assets, but definitely your gifts, your talents, and your abilities. So in 1 Peter 4:10, it says that God has given each of you a gift from his great variety of spiritual gifts. Use them to serve one another. So it's important for us to think about how we're assessing what our gifts are, our true talents, and ask ourselves, how can I put these in service to others? And then embrace your place. What do you think I mean by embrace your place?
You have the authority of Christ.
What?
You have the authority of Christ. Is that
The authority of Christ. I like that you're saying that. That's not what I meant, but I like that you're saying that.
It makes me think of not striving anymore, like ceasing striving and having contentment.
Yeah.
Not striving and being content. Okay. I think that's definitely a part of it.
Being content and being focused in like where you're placed, if that makes sense. So like it doesn't matter how far she's going or what he's doing, just knowing your purpose, being focused and content in that.
Yes. Yes. And again, we're going to go back to this idea of ambition. Ambition is okay. God gave it to us. Right? It's when it becomes self-focused that we need to like realign our ambition. So embrace your place is that sometimes it takes longer for us to get to the places we want to go. Sometimes we look at Jane and Mary, and Jane and Mary are getting ahead a little faster than I am. Sometimes, I want to accomplish something and I see that somebody else somehow they're just like sliding right through, and for some reason I feel like I'm knocking my head up against the wall. That could lead to competition. And it's very subtle, even in Christian spaces, right? Well, why did she get her book and I haven't been able to finish my book, right? Or why does she have her ministry? I want to have a ministry like Joyce Meyer. When am I going to have that, right? Right? We all have these desires, and it might not be a bad thing that you want that, right? You want to write your book. You want to have a speaking, business. You want it, whatever it is that you want, right, for yourself. There's nothing wrong with wanting that. But when we stop thinking that, or we stop believing that God placed us placed the dream in our heart, and then put us where we are for a reason, it might take a little longer for me than it does for you to get to a certain place. And I love the story of Joseph. I love the story of Joseph because Joseph had a dream. And he was just a little arrogant about it, just a little. And what happened? Did he not get sidetracked? Just a little? A little sidetracked? Yeah. And I'm assuming he suffered, even though the Bible doesn't tell us that he did. But if I were to put myself in Joseph's shoes, I am sure I would have suffered, right? However, what does the Bible say about God's status and Joseph? It says, but the Lord was with Joseph. Yeah. He was with him in jail. He was with him where Potiphar's wife tried to go after him, and he turned her down. He was with him in the cave. He was with him at all times, right? Yeah. Joseph was not alone, despite the troubles and the tribulations. And his dream, what happened to his dream? It came to pass, right? And at the end, what was he able to do? He was able to reflect back on his journey. A very painful, ugly, sad journey that I know I wouldn't have to don't want to live through. And he said, at talking to his brothers, right, who threw him into the hole in the ground, and he says, I know that what you intended for my harm, God intended for my good. Yes. Yeah. So we need to trust that despite where we are in our place, even though Mary and Jane are moving faster than we are, that wherever I am in this moment, that God intends for me to be here. There's something that I need to accomplish, something that I need to learn, something that I need to work through that's going to feed my mission, whatever that dream was that God put in my heart. So I can continue to dream. I can hold on to that. And knowing that, when you truly know that in your heart and in your gut, that God is preparing you for your dream, it's easy to look at Mary and Jane and be happy for them. I no longer look at them with like competition. It's like, wow, amazing. How can I help you? How can I support you? God has blessed you. I don't know what you went through in your journey to get you to where you are, that God prepared you for this moment. And I want to move with God. I don't want to move against him. Because when we look at somebody with competitive eyes and with a competitive spirit, what are we doing? We're moving against God. God ordained that. And he ordained something for you too. And now you're saying, God, what you've given me is not good enough right now. I want something else. I want more. Why aren't you moving faster for me? No, it's all in his time. And we need to trust that. And when we trust that, then it's easier to be happy for other people and move with God in support of whatever God is doing in the direction that he's moving in. Any questions about being asset focused? Great. So here's just some advice on how we can overcome comparison and competition, because I've got to tell you, I've been speaking to audiences, mostly secular. I speak to Christian audiences, but I speak mostly to secular audiences. And I've got to tell you that there hasn't been one time when I've spoken to a secular audience that a woman has not asked me why other women don't support women. I've been asked that question time and time again. So at this point, because I've been asked that question so many times, I make light of it. I say, I've been asked this question so many times that it tells me that you evil women who are catty and hurt other women are in this room. That's right. So if you're here, I am asking you on behalf of all the other women to stop. I just do it because I'm like, it keeps coming up, right? So they've got to be in the room because I hear it all the time. So as Christian women, I feel like it's incumbent upon us even more so to make sure that we're being collaborative and not comparing ourselves, but really embracing God. I've got a colleague who talks about, instead of thinking about things as competition, really think about somebody who is doing well as a pacing partner. Right? This person is doing really well, so instead of thinking about them as your competition, you're like, hey, how do I pace myself so that I can start moving ahead as well? Right? So that's one way to kind of overcome it. But, focus on your unique calling and your purpose as to, when we talked about being asset focused. Celebrate others' successes without feeling threatened by it. Trust in God's timing and that he has a plan for your life. Redirect your energy towards growth and towards service. And remember that comparison, all it does is it steals joy, and that competition breeds envy. And that is Satan's playground. So now, to wrap up, outcome focused. So think of this as a checklist, right? Once we've been spiritually focused, once we've been asset focused, think about being outcome focused. What is the outcome of your behavior as a result of your ambition? 1, are you pleasing God in all that you do? Is he your ultimate focus? Ask yourself in a moment that you might feel competitive, or you feel like there's a lack of collaboration, or you feel like your ambition is becoming selfish. Ask yourself, am I pleasing God right now with what I'm doing? And that should be a check for yourself. Then the next thing to think about is reflect on your character evolution. Because the reality is that if you suffer from selfish ambition, it doesn't turn off in one night. You can't just say, hey, I see the selfish ambition in me and I'm just gonna shut it off, right? It's an evolution, right? That's why we dig into the Bible and we engage in prayer and Bible study on a regular basis, because as we engage in that, we start, reflecting on ourselves. The Bible is like a mirror. It starts to show us our character flaws, and then we start to transform as we recognize these things in ourselves. So ask yourself, is your character evolving as a result of your dedication to the Lord and now your desire to change? And then lastly, measure how others are doing because of your involvement. Are they better off? And this is huge, right? Because especially in corporate environments or in a place where you're dealing with things like office politics or gossip and that kind of thing in the workplace, are you part of that? Are you part of the culture if that's what the culture is breeding? Or are you now helping others even though there is that type of a toxic environment? Are you able to go in there and support other people through it? So we need to think about how we can support others and whether people, even in a bad environment, can feel supported by you in a situation like that. Are they better off due to your involvement? So to wrap up, let's let God's truths shape your ambitions and remind you that your ultimate purpose is to glorify Him in all that you do. Thank you. Any questions? So I hope you will all connect with me on LinkedIn. Would love to connect with you. And also, if you're looking for any resources, you can go to christiancareerwomen.com. I also have a table with a few free resources. Hopefully they're not gone by now, but you could feel free to go over there and pick them up. Thank you. Thank you.